Welcome to the first episode of Excavation for the Impossible, a weekly podcast written and read to you by Łukasz Podgórski. Stories that you will hear, or rather stories that will happen to you, are stories that in later times will be referred to as Excavation for the Impossible. What the impossible is a difficult matter that I'm not going to investigate in here. Enough to say that it became an obsession for a powerful and influential wizard and philosopher that decided to hire 3 mercenaries to help him on his quest. For those 3 heroes, although that word might not suit them very well, this excavation is merely a job. They fetch certain artifacts, slit throats and explore the unknown, not for the idea or fame, but pure gold. And as long as their employer pays well, they don't ask questions. This podcast is an attempt to record their adventures and shed some light on the genesis of the excavation itself that led said mysterious wizard into madness and turned the world into... well, no spoilers for now. Stay with me and hear for yourself. Open up! Open the door! Roland chopped the wooden door of a hut being placed in the middle of the dark wood. No roads or signposts led here, and even farmers living nearby might have not known about this place either. The person living inside enjoyed his solitude and peace indeed. Open up, for God's sake! We got a wounded one! Roland screamed again and chopped the door even harder with his metal fist. Wilbur was barely standing, leaning on him heavily. I don't know how much more I can stand, Wilbur whispered while coughing out the blood. You have to endure, Wilbur. There is no choice, Roland hissed at him. Open up, you son of a bitch, or I'll rape you with a branch from the tree you live in. That was Rachel, of course. Rachel, Roland rebuked her quietly. She looked at him frowning in anger, and then the door opened up. Hello? Who's there? The voice of the old man whispered in the darkness. Wilbur looked at the chink from which the voice emerged. He could not see a person, but he could sense a field of energy guarding him. The door was merely an ornament. Open or closed, nobody could get through that field without the permission of the host. Our friend is wounded! Help us out! Roland cried. We don't have much time. Your friend, yes, said the voice slowly and calmly. I could help, perhaps, yes. Leave your weapons outside, please. We have no time for that, Rachel screamed. Just help him or he'll die. He will die anyway. Voice seemed to be undisturbed and unaffected by Rachel's tone. I might let him die later than these few moments he has left, but only if you leave your weapons outside. I am old, you see, weak. It's for my own safety. What about... Roland shut her mouth before she had a chance to say more. We will leave our weapons, as you say. He looked at Rachel. A pair of frowning, hatred-filled eyes stared at him. He took his hand away gently. Leave your weapons on that bench, please, said the old man. Rachel was anything but happy, but she did as she has been told. Then she held Wilbur so that he wouldn't collapse, yet she did so with a great effort, and Roland took off his great sword from his back and mace from his side. He came back to Wilbur and took the weight of his body from Rachel. We're ready, said Roland. You are indeed, Voice stated, but your friend, the wizard, is still in possession of his stuff. Put it on the bench, please. Are you insane? He's unable to stand. How could he? Please take his stuff, Roland said calmly. Just do what he says, or Wilbur will die. You know that. Rachel gave him a quick look, sighed heavily, and took the stuff from Wilbur's bag and put it on a bench with the rest of the weapons. Good. Come in, please, the voice said, and Wilbur could not feel the energy field that was there just a second ago. It vanished as if it never existed. The door opened up, and they hurled inside. Put it on the table, a voice said from the other room. Without hesitation, they dragged him there. In the other room, there was a table indeed, an old wooden table, a bit too small for Wilbur's body, but it would have to be enough. Put him on his... The voice hesitated for a moment. On his belly. Yes. They laid Wilbur on his stomach and stepped back. From the darkness of the room a man appeared. Very tall, maybe even too tall for a man, and big like a bear. He had a long beard visible from under his oversized coat that covered his entire body, including most of the face. He approached Wilbur and put his shuddering hand on him. His hand was furry, and his nails were more like claws. Yes, it is the back indeed where the problem is. It's very strange. He paused for a moment as if he was listening to Wilbur's body with his hands. Help me take off his robes. It might be a parasite. They did as they were asked. Wilbur's body was thin and weak and shuddering from fever. A few scars marked his body, but there was nothing on the outside that could have suggested what the problem might be. The old sage was sliding his massive hands across Wilbur's fragile body while murmuring very softly. Rachel watched the interior of the place very carefully, but there was hardly anything to see. Everything was covered in deep darkness, as if there was no windows, even though she spotted at least 3 from the outside, and the only visible area seemed to be an old table with her friend on it, and the old man's furry hands and beard. For the rest of his body dwelt in said darkness. The old man was examining Wilbur with uncanny diligence, and Rachel was finding the silence surrounding the whole plight almost unbearable. Come on, Wilbur, she thought to herself while looking at her companion. It is time. Get yourself together. Roland noticed her nervousness, and he could swear that the old man also glanced at her once or twice. But if he was observant enough to see it, even more, there was nothing he could do to calm her down. He had to wait, hoping that she will not squander their plan, and that Wilbur will finish his spell. Spell. That was a word that simply did not fit in Roland's mind. He had heard a little bit about the monastery that Wilbur came from, but he had never saw a maid that has been in possession of magic like that. Magic of flesh, Sage muttered. His hands shook. Roland's heart skipped a beat. Pardon? Roland said quietly, trying to sound natural. And he did. He had been trained as a master of persuasion. It is flesh magic. The old druid's voice trembled a little. Wilbur started moaning and cowering. Rachel took a small step forward, hopefully unnoticed. What magic? I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Will he be... Roland wasn't able to finish that sentence. The druid took a step back and interrupted him. You have to leave. And you have to leave now. Roland took 2 steps forward towards the old man. His armor served as cover for Rachel that was little enough to hide behind while staying close to Wilbur. Roland wasn't sure if that would be enough, but it was all he had. "He will die," he started. "And there is no one we could ask." He attempted to take another step towards the druid, but he stopped him with his beast-like hand. Roland spread his hands in a capitulating gesture. "I don't want to have anything to do with it." His voice was deep and strong this time. It almost shook all of the furniture inside the house. "It was my mistake to let you in, and now you have to go." Wilbur screamed. Screamed hard, almost innocently. "Sir, I beg you, I don't care if he dies. That's nature after all. Leave now, or I will—" He did not finish his sentence. He grunted instead and looked slowly at his belly. He saw 2 strings of blood coming out of it. Daggers sunk deep in an almost unseen movement. Rachel held them, her face expressing all kinds of hatred and wearing the vengeful smile of an evil winner. Too bad she had underestimated him. His hand took a massive swing and her little body smashed into a thick wooden wall so hard that she wasn't even able to scream. The host of this house and, as it turned out, the victim of a clever ambush, covered his wounds with one paw and glanced at Roland. What he saw left him speechless. Roland stood just beside Wilbur and, with both hands, he was pulling out a sword. He was pulling a sword out of Wilbur's body. Out of his spine, to be precise. It looked as if the mage was giving birth to it, but with his spine instead of his genitals. His scream sounded inhuman. That short moment of shock was enough for Roland to get his weapon, and he did not hesitate. With the same pull he gave to take the sword out, he struck it against the giant druid that grabbed it with his other paw. Blood covered his fur, but he managed to hold it quite firmly. He started murmuring some spells. Roland tried to get his weapon back, but he was too far away to kick his opponent or to attempt to break his arm, even though his arm was the size of a bow. It was the great sword that Roland held, and it was the end of it that Druid so strongly held into. But at that moment, Rachel was back on her feet. She rushed at the big guy and jumped at him from behind, landing on his neck. She crossed her daggers on his throat and, without hesitation, she slit it. And now, she was the one totally shocked. Her and Roland. Her blades made the blunt sound of cutting wood. Instead of blood on their edges, she saw amber. The same with Roland's greatsword that was now dripping with it. It could have been at that time that all 3 would die in the druid's hut, becoming food for a 3,000-year-old tree or something similar. But it was Wilbur that, despite unspeakable pain, went through, managing to drag himself up, holding on to his staff that in that case definitely did not come from his body, but rather from outside the hut, screamed out loud words that were impossible to write down. And maybe it was good for everyone, considering the effect of the spell. The druid's body shook a little. He let go of Roland's blade. At that time, Rachel also jumped down to the floor. Then he started trembling, shaking unnaturally, and from his body, if it could be called like that, insects started coming out. Digging holes in and out, they flew and jumped around, hundreds, if not thousands of them. The large body of the old sage collapsed to the ground, and he did not make a sound. Nobody present in the room did. "Is he?" Rachel uttered, but no one answered. Then Roland grabbed Wilbur that couldn't stand on his own. He put him back on a table he previously lay on. "Just give me a second," he whispered. "Take your time," Roland replied in a cold tone. Then he turned to Rachel. "She is exhausted and needs to rest. We'll have to finish on our own, Rachel," Roland said in the perfectly still voice of a leader. He had to be one hell of a paladin back in the day, Rachel thought. "Is he dead?" She finally finished her question while poking the druid's wooden body with her daggers. She had to shake off some instincts that stuck to him in the process. "Let's find out," said Roland. Then he looked around and went to the other room. Rachel had to wait only a moment for him to come back. "No way," she said in a surprised but, strangely, joyful voice. "Are you beheading trees too in the Legion? Is that what you're trying to do?" "It's not a good time to crack jokes, Rachel. Be ready in case he moves." Roland stood astride the old sage's supposed head with a massive axe he had to find in his stash. It took few swings, true, but he managed to separate his head from the rest of the body. Tons of worms danced together in a weird amber-like mixture. Rachel felt sick, but she couldn't explain why. "Dead enough to me," Roland stated in a cold tone. "Let's go find the map." Auriel called this guy Druid, while Roland and Wilbur called him Sage while talking with each other. Rachel didn't give a damn about things like that, but one was clear to her. Whoever this guy was, he was into reading. And he read a lot. The hut was basically a remote library. Books filled every wall and were placed on every single piece of furniture they could find. This made researching for a map even more difficult. Roland took every single book and searched through every page carefully. "Are you going to look through all of them?" "We are, yes," he replied without taking his eye off the pages. "If this map is so important, I doubt he would place it in a book," said Rachel dismissively. "Maybe he would hang on a wall behind the glass with letters engraved above, 'Important, please don't steal.' What do you think?" "Wow," Rachel ejaculated with her hands resting on her hips. "You do joke, then." Roland did not respond, but kept searching instead. Rachel didn't join him, though. Instead, she went upstairs. Old wooden steps creaked surprisingly loud underfoot. When she got there, she found an old desk by the wall with a little lamp beside it. Just next to it, though, there was a massive door. Made of steel and iron, it looked like it could withstand so much more than the fragile construct of the whole building might suggest in the first place. Her eyes caught a map stretched across the whole desk, and it had to be this one. It perfectly matched the description that Roland had provided them with, but the curiosity of the door totally overtook her. She took her tiny steps towards the door, approaching quietly as only she could. When she got really close, she could hear it. Breathing. Strong like the wind, but gentle like spring. The breathing of something that had to be a size definitely not suitable for the hut they were in. As she was just about to take another step, a sensation stopped her. It was not a sound or touch, but a feeling. Whatever was inside, it moved. And with it, the whole house moved too. And yet its steps, assuming that This beast did indeed have legs, were gentle enough not to be heard. It's not walking that I heard, Rachel thought. It's moving that I experienced. Don't you dare. Very delicate, but firm. She turned around and noticed Wilbur barely standing at the top of the stairs. He took a map out of the desk very carefully and nodded at her. She saw the fear behind his eyes. She took a few careful steps back and grabbed his hand. Now she noticed Roland too, standing just behind him. He had his greatsword ready. They descended the stairs slowly, and when they reached the bottom, Rachel squealed. "What the hell was that about? Do you have any idea what lives upstairs?" Wilbur rebuked her angrily. His face was tired but burst with emotions nonetheless. "No," she screamed. "Do you?" "No," he replied instantly. "Do you feel like finding out?" "We got what we came for," Roland said, looking at the map that Wilbur squeezed in his hand. "Let's go. We seek no more trouble." "Go?" Wilbur's opposition surprised Roland deeply. "We don't know what lives there." "You don't seem like you want to find out either," Rachel replied, frowning. "Not at all." He gave her the didactic look of an overprotective parent. "I don't want you to find out. First things first, you wouldn't want to know. Secondly, you'd be dead. The third thing is that beast would escape and none of us would know. Roland," he faced towards him before she had a chance to reply, "leaving this beast behind does not mean that it's not our problem. It will be our problem, just not in the way we expect. It will run free when there is no magic to enforce the door, and whatever we'll do, it will be on us." "I didn't expect to hear such moral concerns from someone of your kind," Rachel nodded sarcastically. "It's not moral," he hissed. It's right. We have to examine it, or at least neutralize it for a while, maybe come back to it after our job is done." "You can come back to it whenever it will be done," Roland said harshly. "We got what we came for. Whatever beast is, and whatever it will do, it's not part of the mission. And when said mission will be done, it will not be our concern. Feel free to come back here whenever afterward. But for now," he opened the door, "we're done." Roland did not wait for Wilbur's reply. The discussion came to an end. He went out of the door and Rachel right behind him. Wilbur said something and sighed, likely more than once, but he went out too. His leader did not give him much choice.